Good afternoon, it's Marcus here. I've been thinking about Dr. Jeannie Hoffman's awesome lecture, thinking how she mapped out so much for us in such an elegant and crystal clear way that I just wanted to keep that momentum going in this lecture, looking at what I'm calling major approaches, finding your future's path. So what I'm going to do, obviously, is to switch to webcam desktop, which I'm doing right now, where we have a splendid image of two tracks. One obviously well used, the other not so well used. It's a direct reference to the famous Robert Frost poem, The Road Less Taken, or Travelled, The Road Less Travelled, which is a beautiful poem. And as you all know, I'm a great poetry fan. So if you haven't read the poem, you can just Google it and you'll find it like that. Robert Frost, Road Less Travelled. Because often we follow the dominant road. We just we've been conditioned since conception really to conform to societal expectations and so on. It's only as we get older that we start to realize that we've been fooled, perhaps. But anyway, futures, of course, is about unleashing our deeper potential and, of course, very much doing so in the company of others, which I think is absolutely critical to acknowledge. So what I want to do first is to look back in order to look forward. I think it's so important to keep folding in the experiences that you're having in this particular course. And by looking back to look forward, what do I mean? Well, I mean very simply, we're going to look at the first couple of slides that Jeannie Hoffman offered us, or some of the early slides, not necessarily the absolute first, just to reiterate these things. So she gave us principles of foresight, and I think that's great. And I keep having to move myself around here. So I'm just going to drag myself over the other side again, just after having moved myself out of the way before. So here we are. Frame foresight as a learning journey. So I'm going to be dealing with a little bit further on that, a learning journey. Well, what kind of learning? Well, it's an action learning journey. It's a participatory action learning journey. It's an anticipatory action learning journey. I'm a true believer in, I'm a true believer in the power of adjectives to say, well, what kind of learning journey are we on? Dominant education systems, they put a lot of value on the learning journey, but the learning journey within a highly structured system is the road taken, not the road less traveled. It's the dominant road. It's my way or the highway. And I'm very much, let's go some other way. Let's cut across country. Let's climb that tree or hill. Or, hey, look at that, there's a koala there. That's the sort of thing that I'm into as much as anything. So to do that, to look at framing our learning journey, we have to challenge our used futures. Used futures are the futures that we've been given by somebody else and told, hey, this is the future you want. You want, a car, a mortgage, a good job, a nice tie, a good partner, and so on, and obviously a good income. And that, with all of that, you're not going to disturb the status quo, okay? So that's a used future. And of course, we have them at an individual level, but we also have them at a societal level. China can measure its gross GDP by the fact that it's, lifted 300 million people out of poverty over the last 4 decades. And it measures that in the number of cars people own, the kind of lifestyles they have. They bought straight away into a Western capitalist model of success. That was the used future at a societal level. And of course, it comes at an immense cost. But of course, we need to find alternative futures where people can get the same kind of validation, you would say, in their lives, but in much less destructive ways. And that's part of the key to it, How do we build futures that are fulfilling our human yearning to become whole, to be part of things greater than ourselves, and so on. And you know that yearning is one of my favourite words, right? And more about that in later lectures. We'll touch on it a little bit in this lecture, but I'm going to be focusing more on that later. So we're searching for disruptions and emerging issues. So what's happening today? And there's a lot happening today. People doing things, people rejecting the dominant status quo. I was just reading, Krista Tippett, who's the On Being lady. If you haven't listened to On Being, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favourite podcasts. And Krista Tippett is saying, she's been deleting news apps. And she sees it as a spiritual imperative to delete news apps because the paralysis that's overwhelming her and her North American friends and colleagues and so on is being fueled by the deluge of negative news that's pouring in upon them from all sides. So they're making a safe zone in which they can actually think about the futures they want and keep investing in those futures. So we create scenarios, stories, and in that particular newsletter that I was reading, she offers us a beautiful story about drawing on Hasidic, which is the mystical Judaism brand, which is really wonderful, and they stories everywhere in that particular tradition. Where in the beginning there was this incredibly perfect, like a jewel, and it got exploded. It's shattered into millions and millions of pieces, and each piece ended up in somebody in some form of conscious representation, be it a stone, a tree, a koala, will go with them, or a human being, or a microbe for that matter, or a sunbeam. And it's our job to find them and to recognize them. So ask who's not in the room. Jeannie mentioned that a number of times, and it's really key. Who's not in the room? Indigenous people, people of diverse gender persuasions, lower socioeconomic people, obviously ethnic, diverse people, people who are not of my tribe, and so on. Who's not in the room? So critically important to look around. It's that North American story about who speaks for wolf. I might go and find that because I have it as a PDF and add it to the readings for this week to accompany it. Who speaks for wolf is where a tribe of Indians they make a move without actually consulting the person in their tribe who was closest to the wolf kin. They were kin, in other words. They're not just wolves over there, they were part of a sort of system or ecosystem. And they end up having to remove the tribe because they were in the middle of a wolf hunting area, and it caused considerable problems. So this who speaks for wolf type question is there. It's a beautiful story, and I'll share it with you. We find the worldview and the narrative. So is the worldview a dominator worldview or an ecological, collaborative, participatory worldview, and so on. And we've got a link, vision, our vision, where we want to go today. It has to have practical implications so that we can actually move out of the hole that we might feel we are in. So then this is the other slide that I want to draw on from Jeannie's lectures at the moment. Go back. I'm trying to get myself out the way so I can actually read the words myself. Here we go. So the future is not predetermined and cannot be known or predicted. In other words, of course, the future hasn't happened yet. So we have no future facts in that concrete way, but we do have facts in the sense that we can see how different images of the future are affecting people's choices in the present. That's the way that we infer or intuit what's going on. The future is determined partly by history. That's why I'm such a strong believer in the historical consciousness that accompanies future's consciousness or complements it. Social structures, reality, and partly by chance, innovation, and human choice. So there are these determinants. In other words, it's kind of like the context. What's the context in which this kind of future problems is situated? Okay, there is a range of alternatives out there, and these can be forecast using the futures methods, and quite a number of which I'm going to explore with you in this lecture. And Future's outcomes can be influenced by our choices, by human choices. So what I choose to do, if I choose to go home and stop doing anything for anybody other than myself, of course I am buying into the passivity of a dominant modernist capitalist regime. If I choose to go home, start a vegetable garden, then start sharing my knowledge about vegetable gardens with my colleagues and neighbours, start sharing the produce, doing exchange, entering exchange networks that are non-monetary or non-driven by capitalist concerns, then other things start to happen. And finally, early intervention. If we get in early, we're more likely to generate a future that we are committed to, that we are desirous of. That's our preferred future. And so that whereas crisis, when it comes, we're often forced to react as opposed to adapt. I really like those slides from Jenny, and I wanted to come back to them because it's very easy to go, oh, that was a great lecture, and then sort of file it away, all right? When in actual fact, we should keep revisiting these things. So then, my 10 cents worth, 5 cents worth, how many kronas are they? I don't know, but, whatever it is. How many shekels, if you want to go to the Jewish story that I was talking about earlier. Uses of the future. What can we do with the future? All right, we can expand our present possibilities. Yep, we can identify where agency resides. Who's got the agency here? Is it me, or is it somebody else? Or is it us? Is it a collective? Where does agency reside? Okay. How do we destabilize the present? Well, if we're thinking about futures that are alternatives, they can really challenge, present-centeredness, okay? And that's a really good thing. They can destabilize our habits of thought. The future can challenge power structures. In other words, it has that critical edge that Sahel and others, myself included, value so much in the future field. It's the who's not in the room question. It can invite those into the room, so there you go, I just said it then, and it just enriches our thinking. It feeds our imagination. I'm going to be talking about the imagination shortly too. So opens up context to alternatives. So just as different forms of history generate alternatives in the present, different forms of futures imagined generate alternatives in the present also. So all over, I would say, in summary, the futures thinking acts as a solvent upon dominant habits of thought, social processes, cultural assumptions, and so on. So let's look at this. This is fun. This is one of my little moving things. Understanding sense making. So when we start to do futures work, we're trying to make sense of things, and we start with information. We're going to look more at information in, I think it's next week if I'm going according to plan, but if not, it'll be the week after. But looking at information, how does information, what sort of data is useful to inform our futures thinking? And there's a filter there, and I'm going to be looking at the filter when this image is constructed, okay? The filter between information and knowledge, okay, is a cultural filter. It's an epistemological filter. What kind of information is useful to build certain kinds of knowledge? Some knowledge can be very useful. The knowledge of a surgeon on the functioning of our heart is useful because, of course, it will keep us alive potentially if we ever have problems with that particular mechanism in our body. But other forms of information may be almost disinformation. Going through that filter, we can end up with fake history. I've got a couple of books called Fake History, and we can end up with fake futures as well. The kind of futures that are being promised to people who are really on the edge and anxious and emotionally vulnerable, that are being promised by right-wing political parties at the moment, and those nasty leaders that are out there leading such parties. They are selling false futures. Okay. Key to the filter is understanding what the values, the ethics, and the morality is that's functioning within that space. What kind of culture, in other words, is shaping the sense-making process. And those values, ethics, and morality are linked to behavior. You know the old saying, don't do what I do what I say. Or don't do what I say, don't do what I do. Okay, that sort of stuff. You know, a parent telling a child not to smoke when they smoke is a very simple example of that. But our behaviors that we are committed to are linked to deep values, ethics, and morality. It's linked to, in other words, deep metaphors and myths. These are not conscious, and often we don't want to go there because we don't want to challenge behaviors. I have a very big petrol guzzling car. I don't want to downgrade and start using public transport, for instance, is a good one. What are your true values? Well, your true values are, I can park wherever I damn well like. In other words, my car is a symbol or representative of my ability to do what I like in the world that I inhabit, regardless of anything else around. So that kind of hyper-individualism that's represented by the automobile is an example of the behavior, values, ethics, and morality link that acts as a filter between information and knowledge. We will be coming back to this, of course, and it's key to how, or why, actually not how, but why we use CLA. So if we're going to strategize the future, we can do a little bit of a futures audit. We can say, well, what are the blocks? You know, what are the forces that resist our change? What are the forces that frame context? Okay, what are those forces that are acting in that filter space? Okay, then we can say, well, what about gaps? What about unknown unknowns? And what about epistemological breaks, discontinuities, and things that are blindsided? In other words, there's a bunch of stuff going on in all contexts, I would say, that even the most, enlightened of futurists are not always fully conscious of, because, of course, they're built into the infrastructure of the world we inhabit. It's like the air that we breathe, or if you're a fish, the water that they swim in. But we can get closer to unpacking unknown unknowns, for instance, and futures tools are key to helping us do some of that. What about our futures friends? We've got futures friends, forces that you can leverage to achieve resilient futures. Futures friends can be aspects of the economy, aspects of society. They can also be systems of belief and so on. They can be obviously faith systems like Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and so on. But they can also be other forms of belief systems, let's say like ecological thinking, systems thinking, and so on. These are friends. So that, and if we can find our futures friends and we can buddy up with them, you could say, you will find that the future opens up for you and becomes a more hopeful space. For a start, you're not feeling alone, right? So then let me talk a bit more about this, about what it is that we're sitting in here. So I'll just flick back to this. There are forces that work that are blocks. There are you wouldn't say it's a force, but there are gaps. There are absences. Who's not in the room sort of stuff. The gaps there, and then we've got our friends. So I want to talk about this concept of immanence. An immanent object is something that's present but not seen. So you could say, if you were a capitalist, that the hidden hand of the market, Adam Smith stuff, it's immanent to the entire system of capitalist market economy, particularly as we understand it in a neoliberal environment. You could also say, if you were an indigenous person, that love is a organizing principle. It's immanent to the world around us. We often live loveless lives, but it's because you could say, hold an umbrella above our head because our little ego is afraid of being hurt, and we don't get the rain on our head, and the rain in this metaphor is love. Or it could be relationship, which is very similar to love, also a deeply indigenous and mystical kind of sense of belonging to things greater than ourselves. So let's have a look at this concept of immanence then. I'm drawing, because I really love these guys, on the thinking of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. These guys spend a lot of time hanging out and coming up with really cool ways of trying to describe social processes, one of which was immanence. We're going to use a couple of their other words as we go through this. Immanence indicates an awareness that there lies in any present moment a whole range of alternative possibilities, but they've been silenced, okay? We don't see them, or we don't recognize them, or we just sense that they're there, okay? But that's it. Immanence also suggests that the resources for these alternatives are already with us too, okay? If only we could identify them. So, if that's the case, and we're swimming through a world of alternative possibilities in which, if we can seize or grasp or bring some of these together in different ways, we can generate alternative futures to the ones that seem so bleakly in front of us, okay? So let's look at this then. Two concepts relating to that I want to talk about are the absolute and the relative. Deleuze and Guattari theorize a plane of immanence, that there is always this plane that we are part of, okay? And the plane of immanence folds up and down and moves up and about. It's an absolute state of the possible. Anything is possible, okay? So there is no preposterous, there is no absurd or ridiculous, using Jim Data's term, or the term that I use in that little paper that I shared with you last week on ridiculous, okay? There is, however, within those range of possibility, there's a slice that we inhabit, which is relative. And that's where the word territorialization, that's a Deleuze-Guattari word, okay, the materialization of the possible can occur. So a concept, let's say, like democracy, it was used by the Greeks of Athens, right? Okay, and it went underground for 2,000 years or something more, okay? And then it re-territorialized. So you could say, using their terms, it deterritorializes. In other words, it disappears because Rome is not very democratic, okay? And then following Rome, you had the Middle Ages and so on, all of which in Europe were periods where democracy didn't occur. Then, following the French Revolution and the Enlightenment and so on, we get an growing interest in democratic processes, basically to solve problems, like to stop people killing one another. So it re-territorializes there. So I'm using the word deterritorialize, territorialize, and re-territorialize to describe the process in which an idea can be with us, disappear, and then re-emerge. It was never lost. It just was silent for a period of time. There is always a context. So the context of the ancient Greeks with their democracy was not the same context as, let's say, the French with their democracy, or as it then sort of mutated in various forms. It became various forms of democracy across the European continent, and they, through their colonial, power, then spread democracy as, the good of all goods. Winston Churchill's famous for saying, democracy is not perfect, but it's the best thing we've got, okay? So it was spread all around, and so democracy becomes something different in North Korea to what it is in France, the United States, or Australia for that matter, okay? So what happens next? Context will always edit what is possible. It edits the immanent. So then, let me talk about the futures wheel, all right? Now this is something I'm now turning again in a sense to Jeannie Hoffman's lecture. I'll just pull that down and get around the way. The futures wheel. All right, wheel. So here we have one example. The paper is there for you to read. Looking at socio-ecological change, you've got first order, second order, third order change being discussed here. It helps us understand the implications of an action, a choice, or a policy. In other words, it's a narrative tool that you would use with a group of people to think through what happens if, okay? What happens if, let's say, if the entirety of the nation, if all nation states agreed to dissolve their borders. It's pretty radical, it's almost absurd, isn't it? So what happens if that were to occur? Well, then there would be a movement of people, there would be a rush to to cross what had been borders that had sealed against people and so on. But there would also be a shift in the way economies work. There would be a shift in the way politics works and so on. And you would track those implications. And in a sense, this is a scenario machine. So let's continue. So participants will follow the causal links. Socio-ecological change, first order change, second order change, third order change, and so on. So it's looking for causal links. What's the logic between one and the other? Participants that you're working with will identify unanticipated results. The further you move out, you start thinking, well, if that was occurring and that was occurring, that might occur. You know, it might be a long shot. It might be a preposterous future. Absurd. It doesn't matter. The point is that it suddenly brings within the realm of awareness alternatives. And that's what the wheel does. So participants identify futures of the blocks, the gaps, and the friends that I was talking about in that earlier slide. So let's move them. Now you can pause this video as we're going along. Grab a sheet of paper, grab a pen or pencil, and I want you to put something down in the center. I want you to choose something that you're thinking about. No more nation states, or it could be what happens if AI becomes the foundational element of all education, or what happens if the only people allowed to run countries were poets. I would like that, but whatever it is. Okay, so your trend, pick a trend. Okay, and then I'm going to walk you through it. This is very simple. So you got your trend, ready, set, go. Okay, what's an implication of your trend? Think about it, make a note. What's another implication? You can see what's happening. So there are different kinds of implications. So you come up with first order implications. If all nation states agree to dissolve their own borders, what would happen? Okay, there would be mass movements of people. That might be an implication. We might be surprised to find that there are not mass movements of people. It might be a bogey, but it doesn't matter. You put mass movements of people, people decide to stay at home. Might be your second implication. Economics changes. What are that? Okay, then you're scribbling down, pause it again, breathe in, breathe out, get yourself a drink. Off we go. Yippee, we say. We got a bunch of implications there. Now, what about our second order implications? What might be some of those? You're jotting them down. And this is the way the future wheel is constructed in any context where you're working with people. You'd come up with third implications and so on. So that's a very simple exercise. Nice little toy. And my son Dante laughed at me when he saw it because he said it looks so old PowerPoint. But it does the trick. So yippee, we go and off. Let's keep moving. So what we're doing here is we're harnessing the imaginative, the imagination, okay, and domains. So we've got here, and this is something that we looked at last week. Jeannie started using them, the 4 quadrants or the 2 matrix, the double matrix, okay. And it's one of those really useful tools. We've got the exterior world, we've got the interior world, we've got the individual, and we've got the communal, okay. And we have these quadrants with the objective world out there in the external world. That's when if you drop a brick on your toe, it does hurt. We've got the inter-objective. That's where we create systems, social systems, and so on. We have the intersubjective. That's the collective. That's the we. Okay, what was it that I think it was Virginia said? We are, not I am. It was a collective process. Who are we? That was the question. That was it. I'm trying to remember one of our tutorials. So the who are we, this is the cultural space. And then this is your own interiority. This is your subjectivity. So there are domains in which the imagination works. The imagination in the objective world is often quite scientific. It could be engineering. You've got problems and so on that you're dealing with. Now, I just pose this as a way into thinking about this. Think about good old Leonardo da Vinci. I think most of you know about him. So Leonardo, famous for inventing all sorts of things. He was the first person to imagine a helicopter. He was the first person to imagine submarines and all sorts of other amazing things. He was an extraordinarily gifted Imagineer, you might say. But I'm saying, you think about him in the Newtonian universe in which he existed. A Newtonian universe is a universe of clockwork, of gears, okay, where everything is connected to everything and works according to predictable Newtonian physics laws. This means that Leonardo, living in that world, even though he preceded Isaac Newton by nearly 200 years, that was the world that these people operated in. Their imagination was constrained by that Newtonian universe. Da Vinci, who could imagine many things, would never have been able to imagine a mobile phone. Okay? Why? Because everything had to be connected through physical apparatus with one thing and the next. Okay? And that's a Newtonian universe. We live in a quantum universe now, where we take many of the quantum dimensions of our lives, particularly Wi-Fi, let's say, or satellite technologies, and so on, for granted. So imagination has domains. So then, thinking of the use of this double matrix here, I just wanted to give you, and this is from Wendy Schultz and Andrew Curry's really nice paper, looking at the way different methods create different findings or results. So I just snipped this from them. The paper is available to you in the readings that accompany this lecture. So here we got these different quadrants, and it's just the way of breaking up and asking ourselves, okay, our identity, bottom up. My identity, bottom up. Top down. Okay, so this is egalitarian, democratic. This is autocratic, and so on. Relationships between individuals and institutions. This is a way of, I always think in terms of grammar. Possibly it's because of my age, but how do we parse the world we're in? How do we understand the grammar rules that delineate the functioning of human individuals and collectives in different contexts? This is a way of saying, okay, if we're in a bottom-up grassroots world, what does our identity look like? Okay, we can be free, we can be more expressive, you might be an artist or something. If we're in an autocratic context, our identity would be more conformist, simply because, one, our experience would train us to be conformist, but also it's the safe way to be in that kind of environment. So let's think then about agency and imagination. Here we've got the double matrix. We can see that the different quadrants determine what's going on. We go back another one. We can think about imagination and the domains. Each one of these is a domain. Now, let's think about imagination. Who am I? What is possible? That's what imagination of a futurist will be asking of anybody that we're working with. Who are you? What does it mean? Who's your company? It might be a collective, but what is possible within that? And then you've got personal imagination. So these are the quadrants. You've got social imagination, you've got cultural imagination, and you've got a transformational imagination. They ask different questions. What is my potential? My personal imagination says, oh, I want to be a futurist when I grow up. Social imagination, what are my goals? My goals are to run a successful futures company and be out there helping to transform the world. What's my cultural imagination? What's true? What's natural? It's natural for human beings to, work with foresight. Foresight is a natural dimension of human awareness, okay? And so on. What's transformational? What does change even look like? What is progress? How do we engage? These are very profound questions. What is change? Is it, oh, I'm getting upgrade my iPhone to a new phone, or I'm getting rid of my iPhone because I actually want to go with Samsung now, or whatever it might be, or a car, or upgrade your relationship. No, I'm tired of my wife. I think I'll get a new one, or whatever it might be. Is that change? That's not really change. That's just arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic as the ship's sinking. That's not change at all. So these are the questions that I would like you to, you can pin those questions up on the wall and wander around asking yourself, what is change? What's true? What is truth itself? Is truth an external objectifiable factor, or is it something else? I have a friend who wrote one of my favorite papers on this sort of subject. I'm not going to share it with you yet, but if you want it, you can email me. where he argues that truth is an emotion. Okay, and he's a historian who works with oral histories, and for him, when he interviews people, what's true for them is what the story is that they're telling him. Okay, whether he knows it to be true or false, from a historical perspective of what was happening, that's that person's experience, and for them it is true. Therefore, he argues that truth has a strong emotional component. I think that's a very powerful way of understanding this. So what happens next? So then, the learning journey, the learning story that Jeannie was talking about. This is something that you can play with to your own, to your heart's content. We have information. We have the futures thinking that we would apply to that information. We help people develop a plan, which we then implement. It has effects. Okay, I'm doing this. We've changed the company structure. We're doing this. Sales are up 15%. Okay, let's reflect on that. It was really great to have sales going up 15%. The board of directors and the investors are really happy. But what actually was happening was that we were also wrecking more of the environment. Was that a good thing overall? Do I feel that, let's say, the CEO, is my conscience feeling good about this? Maybe we need to re-educate our investors in what are the effective long-term company goals and so on. And then you go back to, well, what's the information on all of this? Well, here's the information, the data on profit. Here's the data on impact on the socio-ecological systems that our company sits within. Oh no, that's not so good. So what are we going to do about that? And then the process runs again. Make sense? Hope so. Then, what about this great image? It's all over the place. Sahel's choice of the iceberg is a powerful choice. It's a metaphor, and it tells a certain kind of story about depth and possibility. It doesn't have, and not everybody's a true believer in the iceberg. Of course, an image is an image. An image carries all sorts of connotations. And I was seeing one of our futures colleagues was quite critical just the other day on LinkedIn of the use of the iceberg. Why is the iceberg popping up? But, that's beside the point. The iceberg is a dominant image that we use currently in futures thinking to represent what Sahel has called causal layered analysis. And it's been effectively used in many, many situations. This is CLA itself across many decades now. So there are 3 books out on causal layered analysis, each one basically mapping a 10-year period in the application of CLA. Well worth getting. You can get them from Sahel in Ayatollah's website, metafuture.org. I think it's org. Okay, so let's keep moving. So there we've got it: litany, social causes, discourse and worldview, and myth metaphor. So here again, we can start off with a context. I developed this particular slide, which I bring in and use many times because it frames what litany is in a more user-friendly way. I call litany the busy world. Okay, so there are natural events. In the news this morning, I was reading that there is a cyclone developing off the Queensland coast. Probably explains why it's mid-afternoon and quite overcast and blustery and feeling a little moody. Okay, but there's also social events, whether it's, let's say, another terror attack, or whether it's, good old Donald Trump saying something daft or outrageous, or whether it's, the fact that the RBA in Australia, that's the Reserve Bank, has lowered interest rates. These are all social events. So what happens? Okay, this is the stuff that gets reported in our busy world, constantly streaming through. We have they fix and maintain things. So the institutions that we inhabit, like the Reserve Bank, fix and maintain things. They also build things. What's the future of our economy? Well, if we lower interest rates, it might be good for the economy. It might be bad for the economy. There's a lot of thinking and, I would say probably nail biting, but also analysis of data that leads the people running the Reserve Bank to lower interest rates. Then, of course, we have the world views that sit beneath these. Okay, what are our values? What are the values that the Reserve Bank represents. Are they my values? I'd hardly say so. But at the same time, the Reserve Bank has a certain deep institutional logic that it not just represents, it actually enforces. Okay, and that's important. And of course, there is knowledge there. So the Reserve Bank brings in data. It's looking at the ebbs and flows of, let's say the Australian dollar vis-a-vis the US dollar, for instance, and it makes judgments according to that, drawing on experience and drawing on certain assumptions about, let's say, the ongoing world order that maintains the worldview that the Reserve Bank represents. Ooh, that's pretty cool. And then beneath that, what do we have? Well, we have those deep stories and metaphors. So we have personal and collective stories about the world. Oops, so that's where the story about the Reserve Bank. It might be a stitch in time saves nine, that old English aphorism, supposedly about thrift and making sure that we've got the future covered. I like that. I hope it works for you. So there's my example. This is drawn from a paper I wrote years ago where I was looking at education and different models of education. And one of those models was the democratic structuralist model, okay, where people participate in a democratic schooling. This is the sort of school that I knew best because I taught in these kinds of schools for 20 years. And I was really lucky to do so because the dominant schooling system would have killed me. I wouldn't have lasted for sure. But in this particular model, we see what's the litany? Students everywhere, community. It's, it would also be chairs and all the rest of it that, create the school, the world. The system that functions is a democratic, we co-learn, we centralize, we have centralized versus decentralization. We have it context specific. I taught in 4 schools across a period of that 20 years. Each one had its own context, and in other words, it had its own internal culture. And there was a triple bottom line at work in a democratic school. Okay, triple bottom line is, we have to pay the bills, so it has to be financially successful. We are accountable to our community, who would be like our shareholders, and we also need to be socially sustainable. Okay, so those triple bottom line. Worldview is learning's a lifelong story or a journey, collaboration, co-creation, participation, and popular authoritarianism. I like that particular term because democracy can sometimes, the democratic form, can be one that enforces a consensus on a group where dissensus is actually present. So that's known as popular authoritarianism. And my metaphor drawn from this paper, of course, is all for one and one for all. Okay, so this is the way I was using it. This must come from 2005 or something. And I have to say that when I refer to things, I often place the reference underneath the slide. But in this case, I'm pretty sure I didn't. If anybody wants to see the entire paper, you'll have to flick me an email and I'll go and find it, because I'm not sure where it comes from anymore. It's too old. All right. So then we want to take people towards preferred futures. I see this as bridge building. And for me, the greatest challenge in futures thinking is the bridge between modeling. This is great dream. We've got a great program set up here, and application and doing, right? So that's key. Also, plausibility and creative intervention, and the real and the possible. Okay, so we've got to build a bridge between the modeling and the doing, the plausible and the creative, the real and the possible. All of them are basically the same thing. So we need to follow a line of flight, great term from Deleuze and Guattari, from an emergent trend to the possible, probable, plausible, preferable, and possibly preposterous outcome. Okay, so bridge building is a metaphor I use. I have written a paper on foresight as bridge building. I'm not throwing it at you yet because you've got enough to read just in what accompanies this lecture as it is. So exploring today, there's the road not taken again, the main road and the little path going off over that way underneath the trees. So contexts. We're facing societal addiction. We're addicted to certain forms of energy. Path dependency. We're addicted to certain forms of economic extraction that helps us access the energy we want. And we've got this great progress. We've progressed so far. And yet what? And yet what indeed? It's a good question. We've progressed so far, but can we unprogress or reprogress in some other direction? And that progress trap is something that Jeannie referred to. She also referred to path dependency. I don't know if she mentioned social addiction. It's not popping up in my mind at the moment. But certainly we are addicted to certain forms of living. We're addicted to the energy regime that sits beneath that. That's an environmental history and environmental futures concept, an energy regime, because the energy regimes determine our own identities. How do I understand myself in that world where that form of energy defines so much of what is possible and who I am. Mixed with that, we get strategic surprises and wild cards. They're the sorts of things that can pop up left of field, whether it might be the re-election of a maverick like Donald Trump, or a sudden a strategic prize. A great one surprise is the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, but also other things. What else is happening? And there's so much happening. I'm surrounded by books and other material that point to the weak signals, you might call them, but there's a lot of energy being invested in alternative futures right now. One great example is From What Is to What If from Rob Hopkins. This takes you to a short talk he gave for a TEDx during COVID. So he was actually in his room at home somewhere talking about this, but it's an excellent talk. And it's a talk about, okay, if you stop saying this is what is, and you say, well, what if, what can we do here? What can we do here? He's a great advocate for that. He tells many stories. He's done research around the planet. Rob Hopkins is the guy who looked at the, it was key to creating the, what's it called? I've got them forgotten, No, it's not coming. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's a social movement that was practiced and is still being practiced around the planet, where cities and towns and communities take on a series of choices and programs that will help them move away from being so energy dependent in the modernist sense. Gosh, I can't believe I've forgotten that. I'll kick myself when I'll keep on moving and it might pop back into my head. But what is to what if, it's also the name of a book that he wrote. And I have it somewhere lurking around here because it's worth a read and it's very inspiring, very hopeful. All right, but let's talk a little bit more about strategic surprise. Peter Schwartz, particularly influential in the scenario planning space. He and Doug Randall wrote this little chapter for a book that was edited by Francis Fukuyama. The link is definitely not the link, the citation is below this slide, called Blindsided. They have this to say about strategic surprise. Thinking about the future and about strategic surprise is a messy business for which precise predictions are the wrong concept. You can't precisely predict something that's, a surprise. The goal is not more accurate predictions, rather it is better decisions and more effective action. It's about being flexible. Schwartz is the guy who ran a whole bunch of the energy scenarios for Shell in the 1990s, and that's where he really honed his craft. He also worked with the Singaporean government in the early 2000s, helping them develop their strategic response mechanism called RAS, Risk Assessment Horizon Scanning Program. And that was what I was involved with in Singapore, working with that in the follow-up to Schwartz's presence there. So, what are my premises? What do I think? Oh, do you really care? I'm going to tell you anyway. All right, so strategic, foresighted futures thinking are forms of social pedagogy, or social learning. It's that learning journey that Jeannie Hoffman's talking about. Pedagogy is integrative in disposition. That means it's pulling together. It's about getting some message across, a coherent message, okay? But it's expansive in nature. Good pedagogy should not be funnel-driven or path dependent. It should open students up. Anybody who's experiencing that educational experience, it should open them up to endless horizons. But it has a center. The center for me is ethical values. It's about affirming the creative, and it's about affirming the quality of each individual's own worth and their potential to work collaboratively in a non-zero-sum world. It's not about winning and losing. My winning and my being able to own a big fat car means that people over there have to walk everywhere. You know, that's not what it's about. So that's the sort of stuff that I'm talking about there. So there is a center. It's an ethical center built around a worldview, best expressed in my little book on neo-humanism, yearning and becoming, which is available to you in the extra readings folder, okay, as a PDF. So pedagogy is relational, and I'm going to map that for you through something rather nifty that I developed 15 years ago or so. It assumes that meta-human context. In other words, there is the human being is part of a kinship network that is human and also more than human. There's a lot more going on in the human space than just what humans think we're all up to, okay? So, oops, oh, look at this, Matthew, brilliant. Ashley, brilliant, not Matthew, Ashley, brilliant. It's strange, but wherever I take my eyes, they always see things from my point of view. I've got another one or two of his little cartoons, wisecracking things coming up. But for me, because they're my eyes, it's my point of view. In the futures context, this means we displace a single center with multiple centers. There is no one center for social pedagogy. There are multiple centers, and we need to learn to get along. Okay, there's paradox at work here, and I think paradox is one of the most delicious things. But how do people handle it emotionally when we're told that we need certainty? And that's a lot of the core assumptions of dominant state-run pedagogies, that we want to be certain that everybody's literate when they come out of the education system, that everybody's job ready when they come out of the system. But what does literacy mean? Well, you might be able to read a shopping list, but you might not be able to read a good book or to read slogans from a political party that are dubious, and to make critical a critical reading of those so that you're aware of who's not in the room, for instance. So we need to rethink human possibility to actualize the relational possibilities, okay? That's really important. What are we able to do? What are our roads less traveled, in other words? In turn, this means we need a method to understand this. And I'm going to play with causal CLA, and I'm calling causal layered pedagogy. This is something that I did with Sahel Singh 15 or more years ago. I had a lot of fun with it, and the paper that I created is also in our extra readings, okay? So what are we looking at? Well, I want to be optimistic. To be anything other than optimistic in a world where everything seems to be totally screwed is our duty, in actual fact. But we need to grow that optimism, not by hiding our head in the sand and saying, yeah, experts will fix it. No, nobody can fix anything other than you and I. So we need a positive vision of human potential that allows us both critique the present and work towards optimal futures. We're yearning for the positive, to belong in a world that seems to disown us. Okay, we are alien or alienated, to use a Marxist term, in a world that disowns us as key driver here. Okay, and for me this is neo-humanism, but I'm not alone in thinking it's neo-humanism. Jeremy Rifkin's Homo Empathicus, that comes from The Empathic Civilization, an awesome book which came out, I think, about 2007, reference beneath slide. Bregman, what's his first name? That's a good question. Do I have? Where are you, Bregman? I've got his book here. Homo Puppy, he talks about, it's in a fantastic chapter, where the survival of the friendliest, not the survival of the fittest or the most vicious. It's a terrific chapter. In fact, I said to myself, I'm going to go and find it, because I have a PDF somewhere, because I use it in a course that I teach at the university, and I will make that available. But I recommend the entire book. It's called A Hopeful History, the book is. And there's, of course, my favorite non-Western thinker, Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, He has his book from 1982 on neo-humanism, and I build off that in my own book, which is, as I've said already, is available to you online through this course. So layered learning. Strategic foresight allows us to take a domain and layer it. When working with people in a foresight context, allow them to begin to appreciate this layered quality, okay, of reality. That's something that I think takes a considerable emotional skill. We are there to help people feel safe, but feel slightly out of depth, but not so much that they can't see that there's a life jacket there or a life raft or something that they can get onto. We can use CLA to implicitly as a pedagogical tool, and this is my causal-layered pedagogy, which is very much just CLA, but it's a way of understanding the learning context in which you and I are all situated in this context right now, because you're taking this little course, you're learning, right? So first of all, there's you smiling away. Okay, the curriculum field, and I'm using the double matrix. There's the tangible and the intangible. The curriculum field, there are things that you can study. I can study frogs, but it's also got desks and chairs and schools and schoolyards, okay? There's the expressible, there's the visible curriculum that we're dealing with, so it's all the tools and stuff of this course. There's intangible stuff, that's the emotional stuff that we need to get a feel for when we're going to work with people. And there's the inexpressible, there's those things about teaching and learning that touch on the creative, on the yearning, to explore, and what makes one person excited but doesn't make another person. Why can somebody get excited about music and another person about maths? Of course, some people get excited about both, but then there's might be history and all these other things. But there's more than that. There's also just the excitement, the inexpressible about who am I, what am I doing here? And that the sorts that becomes mystical and spiritual as well. It's wonderful. So that's the very first dimension, okay? That's the individual dimension. Then in the curriculum field, we have a growing complexity. As curriculum field 1, level 1, all start interacting. Music, maths, science, art, bushwalking, meditation, yoga. You could, cultural studies, looking at faith systems, comparing Buddhism with Islam, with Hinduism, with Christianity, with indigenous spirituality, and so on. All of this is happening. It's swirling around this student sitting here. Then you go, okay, well, what about the whole person? Well, at the litany level, we've got to shove information into kids' heads. Then there is a discipline. That's called math. That's called music. That's called history. Then there's the purpose. What's the purpose here for this young person? Is it for she can get a job, be a good mother, or maybe an active citizen, or maybe a disruptor? What's the story here? Is it a Cinderella story? Is she Cinderella, or is she Sleeping Beauty? You know, a young woman with all her potential before her, but she's unaware of her potential until, you know, the prince comes along. Does she need a prince? Maybe she needs another princess. Maybe she needs an owl or some other kind of symbol of wisdom and awakening. All of these things are at work. I just love that. And then, of course, oh, there's a classroom and a family. We got dad and, you know, mum, a younger brother who really annoys you. There's granddad. There's a couple of friends in the class with her. Okay, teaching the whole person, where information, discipline, worldview, and they cycle up and down, okay? And, you know, I'll go back with that just more. So you can, this is my way of thinking with CLA about the context in which we learn. We do not learn in a vacuum. There is no individual consciousness. It is always a consciousness in dialogue with past, presents, and futures, okay? All of them are plural. That's important to understand. We will revisit that in the tutorials. And because this is all so messy, look at it all, like it's going around like that, we have to understand that post-normality is linked to acceleration. So I've got Ziad and Sada's great paper, Welcome to Post-Normal Times, which is in our Bubble Up Lecture 3 folder. So what can we say? Well, not much beyond what good old Ashley Brilliant has to say. in the time it used to take to make just one mistake, we can now make hundreds, okay? I think that's so clever, and that's recognizing something quite profound about our dominant world, that it is so complex that every time we try to fix one thing here, we might create a problem over there. Something else is going on here, and it means that we're in a post-normal condition, and that post-normality is what is actually defining our realities today. So, your homework in the tutorial on Saturday, and I said, can you do this for us, please? I want you to grab the futures triangle, which Jeannie talked about last week. Okay, she presented 2 slides. I'm going to give you those slides again in a moment. Choose a topic of interest and populate the 3 vertices. Okay, weights, pushes, pulls. Okay, with things that come to you. Do it over a day or 2, okay? If you can have it done by next Friday, that's the 28th, you can send it to me in an email and I will turn it into some sort of display, okay? So I want you to note that there was an entire issue on World Futures Review on the Futures Triangle, that's FT there. The special issue, I just point you to the, I think it's the first paper in the special issue, it's by Sahel in Ayatollah, who of course with his wife Ivana developed the Futures Triangle, and it's become one of the favorite tools of futurists. So this is from Jeannie's lecture singular from last week, okay? So you've got the pull, the push, and the weight. You've got her use of the futures cone sort of being superimposed on the image. So we've got dreamers and visionaries, we've got progressivists, we've got reformists, we've got traditionalists, and we've got the reactionaries, okay? All of them have a place in this world of the futures triangle. So what do I want you to do? Well, I want you to have some fun, of course, but what is your pull of the future? I want you to think about that. What's pulling you? Or should we better frame it as what are your pulls of the futures, plural, all right? Final thoughts. And there is no map of the future because nobody who goes there ever comes back. Ashley, brilliant again, 3rd time lucky, hey? But, you know, it's a really interesting idea. So we are creating maps, but they're maps in the present that are built upon assumptions about the future, but not just assumptions that the future sucks, it's going to be worse than now. It's actually maps of futures that we might wish to inhabit or that we would wish for our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and for all the koalas, ducks, microbes, cockroaches, and everything else out there to also inhabit happily. We can share the world, right? So that's where we end. I will jump out of this to this, and I will say thank you for putting up with me. And, you know, I should have actually said at some point in that lecture, it seemed a bit long, stop, have a break. I did say stop and do some work, but I should have actually said more, shouldn't I? Anyway, thank you so much. Take care, and I'll see you in tutorials.